What is Hebraic thought?
Yeah, I think the simple answer is it's essentially what the biblical authors thought, how they conceptualized their world, how they thought about things like freedom, knowledge, justice, mercy, ethics, morality, the nature of reality itself, and how we might know it, and how they reveal those things in their writings. And so sometimes it happens in not so obvious ways for us Western people who are used to like very carefully constructed linear arguments. This means this, therefore that means that. They have a different way of doing it, but essentially that's all we're talking about is how the biblical authors thought about the world and how they reveal that in their text.
And so, what is it then? I mean, you present it that way in a way that sounds, well, yeah, of course, like that is exactly what Hebraic thought is. And yet, it seems like it's either missed altogether or presented very poorly in a number of different contexts. So, what about that is such a challenge?
Yeah, I mean, I think it gets confused easily. I mean, even by scholar colleagues who've participated or even written articles for us, they said, "Hey, can I include the New Testament in this Hebraic thought article?" And I'd say, "Yes, of course." We view the New Testament text as vibrant examples of what Hebraic thought is. Even some apocryphal text and pseudepigraphal text, you can see Hebraic thought at work in those texts as well. So it's not just the books of the Bible that are the only examples of these things. It also gets confusing because there's a field in scholarship called Jewish studies, which is basically how the Jewish tradition has thought about things over the last 2,000 years, 1,700 years, depending on how you count such things. And so when I recruit academic fellows for the center, I even tell them, even if they're Jewish, I say, hey, we're not doing Jewish thought. We're not doing Jewish studies. We're not thinking about how 20th century phenomenological Jewish philosophers thought about the Hebrew Bible, although that is interesting. There's lots of people who have been doing that for a long time. We're doing something quite different, which is we're going to try and restrict ourselves initially to what the biblical authors thought, first in the Hebrew Bible, Old Testament, and then thinking how that pours forward into other texts throughout the ages, including the New Testament. And then we can once we feel like we have a grasp of what's going on in those texts, we can put them in conversation with later people. But that's the goal, is to have that kind of strategic ordering of thought so that we don't project too much. We're always projecting and trying our best to understand, but we're trying to restrict those moves of projecting too much of our own thoughts back into the biblical world.
And so I guess as you describe that, one of the things that I think of is the interpretive tradition that we have. And let's just pick the Patristics, Scholastics, and the Reformation. So if you think of that stream of thought, not to mention, Judaic thought as well, and the different streams that are represented there. But I'm curious then, is there a point before which it's all Hebraic thought, and then after like things go awry? Or do you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's always a mixture. Everything's always complicated. It's the job of scholarship to say, in some ways this is very simple, but in some ways it's very nuanced and sophisticated and complicated. I do want to say, in the same way that we say, Jesus and the apostles did not practice Judaism as we know it today. Modern Judaism is kind of a sibling religion that emerges alongside Christianity. I like to say that Jesus practiced the ancient Israelite religion that is mostly guided by the Torah with some Hellenistic elements that were shaping it in his own day. So I like to think of ancient Hebraic thought as I think of that as more Iron Age, Bronze Age, depending on how you date certain things. But Bronze and Iron Age thinking that's independent, just like we might talk about Iron Age Mesopotamian thought that would include both Neo-Assyrian, Babylonian, and Persian thought versus later Greco-Roman thought. And so much of the world was invaded by the Greco-Roman conscience. I don't know how to describe that more accurately. So you can, even in Persia, you can talk about when Hellenism enters Persia, when Hellenism enters Egypt, when it enters Israel and Canaan, and Jewish thought as well. So again, since we're trying to keep things strategically in order, the Bronze and Iron Age thinking found in the Torah and the prophets and the Psalms, and some people will debate, does Daniel count as a Hellenistic text? Is Esther a Hellenistic text or not? Is it a text written in that Hellenistic period? But, we can think about the undebatable text where we can say, these are from Iron Age Israel. Let's think about what these authors are trying to say and the world they're trying to construct through these texts.
Okay. That's helpful, especially as people, I think, are trying to discern what is one, what is another, what is a blend. And so I think even in your biblical philosophy book, you actually take a look at the Hebraic thought of Philo and Paul. Is that
Right.
correct?
Right. Yeah, I compare those two. Sorry, the Wisdom of Solomon is the other one I put in conversation there, which is an apocryphal text. So again, from that Hellenistic Jewish period. Yeah.
Okay, so see that book for more, right?
Yeah. And even there, I think what I was trying to show is that someone like Paul, who is fully capable in a Greco-Roman philosophical period, especially Roman thought at that time is going to be dominant. Versions of Stoicism. Paul's often accused of just appropriating Stoic philosophy. But I try to show that actually what he's doing, much like what the Wisdom of Solomon is doing as well, I think Paul's more successful at it than the Wisdom of Solomon. But Paul is saying, okay, you think of things in these cultural concepts and packages and philosophical packages. So I'll use your package, the one you use today, in order to get you over to this much more ancient way of thinking. I think Jesus is doing the same thing, showing always at the same time that they're aware of the current cultural packaging, but trying to move people back, affirming what's good about the current cultural packaging and helpful, but trying to move them back over to what I'm calling Hebraic thought. And being attentive to that rhetorical move in these texts, I think really helps understand the New Testament.
So my subjective, I guess, observation of the broader church's affinity for Paul, do you think it is in a Western context precisely because he is accommodating that Greek worldview, or what is going on there?
Yeah, I think we have, like everything in Scripture, we bend them into our own image, which is going to happen to some extent. And in some way, we bend Jesus into our own image, but that's part of who Jesus is. He shows solidarity with all people in all times. So you don't want to reject that move that we want to see something of ourselves as humans in these people. But I think with Paul, and lots of people have been pointing this out, lots of Paul scholars. So don't listen to me, listen to the Paul scholars. But even someone like Esau Macaulay, who did his original doctoral work on Paul, he was telling me one time, we talk about Paul as justification by faith, according to the Protestant, Lutheran, and then Protestant tradition. He's like, but anybody who reads all of Paul would never walk away saying the center of Paul's thinking is justification by faith. You would get, or they would certainly think about justification in the sense of the term justification, dikaiosune. If you look at how that's used in the Greek translation of the Hebrew scriptures, that is used to talk about justice and righteousness, which means care for the vulnerable, which we know Paul is very concerned about as well. So there's kind of this contorting it into this mechanical contraption that Protestants are really familiar with and really love. We are justified by faith, not by works. And I understand that those kinds of statements and formulas are helpful and necessary for the church in various periods. But even our fascination with Paul is actually a fascination with one slice of Paul. Paul's doing a lot more than we give him credit for. And I think a lot of Paul scholarship has been trying to desperately show that over especially the last 50 years.